Bless the Beasts and Children by Glendon Swarthout, Chapter 8. Uh-oh. A thought punctured Cotton's exultation sighed from him. They'll phone the cops and flag, he worried, and identify us and this junker. And the cops will radio out here for the state police to set up a roadblock on us. That's what they do on TV. Then we've had it. Unless we make the turnoff first. How far to the turnoff? Teff said 7, 8 miles at most. Then floor it. Floor it? Teff made a Ferrari face and pulled down the bill of his Africa Corps cap and knuckled the wheel. Jawol. They watched the speedometer. It hit 80 miles per hour and held, and over the hullabaloo of the engine and the whine of the tires, Teff shouted, "This was it. This is the best the old clunker had in her." And unless they threw a rod, she sounded good for 7 miles. Along they barreled, fearful the three in back would be blown away, hypnotized by the gray river of concrete pouring under them and the trucks and cars and U-Hauls and campers flitting by like moths in the other lane. Cotton clutched the .22. Goodenow was petrified. His fingers worked at the Hopi headband as though unbeating it. "Woo-wee," Teff hollered. Shecker was thrown out of 4 cabins in 2 days. On the third, Cotton let him in, and on the fourth regretted it. Shecker was as insufferable as his father, the famous Sid, whose indulged and overdominated mimic and victim he had become. He was the screech of chalk on slate. He was as loud and nervous and nosy and braggart as New York. He nibbled compulsively at his nails. He ate compulsively. He rattled off his father's routines compulsively. He was always on, and eventually Cotton confronted him. It took in just about anything in that cabin, Cotton said. They had to draw a line. They wanted no more of his father's jokes, no more about the saloons he played or the shows he was on, or who important he knew or how much money he made. In short, shape up or ship out. Shecker said he knew what they really meant. It was because he was Jewish. Cotton sighed and said no, it wasn't, and if there was one thing they didn't need around there, on top of everything else, it was a persecution complex. Shecker shouted they were Nazis. That burned Cotton. No, he said they weren't. They had their own problems and merely wanted a little less yak and a little more peace and quiet in which to solve them. Shecker lost control. Why didn't they call this camp what it really was? He screamed. A concentration camp. If they wanted him out, why didn't they just build an oven and gas him? Cotton groaned and made the mistake of turning his back, and Shecker jumped him. He was bigger and 40 pounds fatter and soon had Cotton down and lay on him like a lump, pounding him till the others yanked him apart. The incident cleared the air. Shecker settled down and began to be human. When he did lapse, being Miami Beach or putting on the Persecution Act, all they had to do was chorus, "Gas him," and he cut the comedy. Large yellow letters against the brown wood, the sign on the right side leaped into the headlights without warning. Teff braked and slewed onto gravel, and then they were turned and through the open gate and away from full house cams and mechanical bowling alleys and civilization, and abruptly, marvelously, back into the night again in the west. It was 2:36. They'd left Box Canyon Boys Camp at 11:48, and now, 3 hours in a bagged truck and some milk and a shootout later, they were practically there. The last 3 miles would be slow going, however, for this road, a dirt single track which dipped into gullies and dry washes, was so corduroy that the frame of the pickup chattered with vibration. The sensation here was one of breadth and elevation, and the triviality of their vehicle, which, like some quadruped insect, explored the brow of the sleeping earth, filling with the antenna of its headlights for something edible, and finding only scrub oak and salt cedar in the manzanita bush. To assert themselves and their importance, they turned radios up, producing a cacophony of the 10 Commandments of Love by Peaches and Herb, and I Feel Like I'm Fixin' to Die by Country Joe and the Fish. They had descended into a dry wash and across a wooden bridge and were grinding over the far lip when the engine sputtered. It was Shecker's lousy personality, though, that goaded the bedwetters into their first feat. Fourth week of camp, a movie played, Prescott Drive-In, which they wanted painfully to see. It was The Professionals, starring Burt Lancaster and Lee Marvin. The Apaches got to go, of course. They were top tribe, but the bedwetters had as much a chance of seeing it as they had of winning a ball game. For 3 nights in a row, Shecker, who was accustomed to having his own New York way, swore that after lights out he was taking off and hiking into town and going to the late show. He did not, naturally, but the third night Cotton could bear no more of his mouth. "All right," he said, "can it and we'll all go. The damn scoring system's unfair, so we'll beat it." And they did. After Wheaties was asleep, they dressed, slipped down to the corral, saddled up, led horses out of camp, and rode the 2 miles to the drive-in entrance at the edge of Prescott. The manager wouldn't let them in at first, mounted, but it was a weeknight in the late show, and there were only a few cars of neckers, and after Shecker slipped him a $20 bill, he sold them tickets. They rode in, tied horses to loudspeakers, bought popcorn and ice cream bars and hot dogs and corn chips and cokes and enchiladas, and sat down and enjoyed themselves totally. In the last reel, the camp director drove in like a posse. The two-faced theater manager had probably phoned him and made some uncharitable remarks about juvenile delinquency. While he discoursed, they took their sweet time mounting up and so contrived not to miss the ending. Back at camp, the director warned them, pull a similar stunt and you'd expel them. The bedwetters listened and looked at each other like Lancaster and Lee Marvin. Teft floored it and pumped the hand choke. The engine responded and they bumped another 100 yards, but no further. It conked out again, this time with the last carburetor gasp. Front and back they just sat. The six just sat there. Don't anybody say it, Teft said. No one did. Don't even think it, but everyone was. Maybe the wires come unglit, he said. And getting out, went round to the front of the truck, raised the hood, and extracting a flashlight from his pocket, switched it on, and had a superfluous look. Switching it off, he returned it to his pocket and let the hood down slowly, ceremoniously. Through the windshield, Cotton and Goodenow stared at him. From the bed, Shecker and the Lally brothers stared at him. As though on stage, Teft stood self-consciously in the headlights. On his cap, the silver eagle glittered. He began with a vagabond grin. How about that, he appealed. I just never noticed the gauge. Believe it or not, I've bagged cars before and driven them dry and no sweat. I just wired a fresh one. He lost his grin. Destroyed, he said. This really destroys me. He gave up, spreading his long arms. He flapped them again against his long legs in contrition. He opened his jacket to expose his chest. So I now offer myself as a human sacrifice to the gas god. And with a low bow and a martyred expression, he draped himself over the white altar of the hood. You may now cut out my heart, he said, and eat it. Suddenly the stage went dark. Teft vanished. Cotton had pushed the headlight knob. It was the most unfortunate thing he could have done. The night came down upon them. They cowered before it, before the implications of an empty tank. Except for the ticking sounds of the engine cooling, they sat in a kind of stranded silence, hushed by the dark, in this new, blabbering proof of their ineptitude. Oh, I'm so sorry, Teft said. I'm just Christfully sorry.